Welcome to Across the Arc, where we dive into the extraordinary work of Equity Arc members. This episode highlights how top music institutions are preparing their students for 21st century careers. Alon Barker from Indiana University's Jacobs School of Music and Kendaya Shepard from Johns Hopkins University's Peabody Institute are both career specialists, educators, and musicians committed to equipping students to achieve their goals. In this conversation, they share insights on embedding career development into the curriculum, their alumni career outcomes, and what it truly means to be a 21st century musician.
And we're going to chat a lot about career development and what it means to be a 21st century musician. So I figured it might be good for us to start with some definitions. In your own words, could you share what does that mean to you to be a 21st century musician?
Hi, Paul. It's so great to be with you both. Very, very special. I'm in awe of both of what you do. So this is a great conversation. So being a 21st century musician, for me, goes in a number of different directions. I think that the way that we do music has been so much more now about creating content that we think is valuable and meaningful to the world around us in a way that intersects with conversations and changes in the music world. And so it really sort of ranges from the skill set that students really need to be aware of that goes beyond the traditional practices that we've inculcated in schools of music and conservatories that include technology, include diversity of genres, that includes intersectionality with different types of art. And so I think that to be a 21st century musician means to be highly flexible and adaptive to the world around you and the opportunities that represent themselves before you, at the same time being really, really, really good at what you do. I think that that's one of the sort of the hallmarks of a successful musician. And then on the other hand, I've thought for quite a while now about the difference between what we do as artists to interpret what other people do and emulate how people tell us to do things versus what we choose to create as we make sense of the world and emerging practices, the stories we tell and how we tell them, where we tell them, who we tell them to. And so there's a component of being a 21st century musician in my mind that has to do with what I call cultural entrepreneurship, where you're intentionally mixing together those elements that you think are really important to your values and to your worldview that end up being the art that you produce.
I would add to that conversation that I think the skills of 21st century musicianship, right? When we talk about that, we're talking about when the musician, as a technical proficiency, enters what we now know to be a global music industry, right? So, in talking with our students about what they're doing here in terms of the classical art forms that they're studying, and also the new emerging art forms that they're studying, understanding where their positioning is in terms of the global entertainment industry and then the music industry as a subset of that. So widening their scope from them now leaving their communities and probably traveling across the world to come to these conservatories, to understanding that their art has the potential to reach a lot of audiences. And now, having gone through some decades of cycles of, as we're talking about entering new technologies, the world is at their doorstep. We have the introduction of things like Instagram and TikTok and the newfangled, when people used to have to only go to the concert hall or different areas, we're changing their perspective of thinking about now going back into the community. So in music history, we study about how these chamber orchestras and orchestras were kind of at the epicenter of their communities all the time anyway. So we are kind of watching the fold come back after that we built the concert halls and everything. Now we're sending them back out into the world and say, hey, any stage, any street corner, any community center can be your stage. How do you, as an individual, now take all those tools and all these things that we're teaching you and be able to put your art to the service of others, right? What does that look like? What are all the conversations you need to have? What are all the connections you need to make in terms of networking and different things? So after we have them, inside of the conservatory, really focusing on their technique and everything. All of the other tools are piecing together everything that they're learning about the world, from their liberal arts credits and everything, putting all those things together and thinking about the person that they are, and then seeing how that comes out as a walking your own entrepreneurial mindset, right? How am I as a person? Not necessarily everybody wants to be a business, but how do I interact with others? How do I form collectives and work with people and collaborate and be a part of projects that are doing what I want to do? So what are those tools that will then help me figure out how to sustain the lifestyle that I want? So where I'm performing at the highest level that I want to perform at, but I'm offering whatever services. So I might be good at speaking, and I'll take on the public speaking engagement. I might be good at grant writing. I'll do the grant writing for my friends, right? What are those other skill sets that we have outside of our technical proficiency on our instruments or with our art that lend to the whole scope and the whole industry in terms of making sure that art is continuously a part of everybody's lives?
What I'm hearing a lot is this holistic approach where what happens in the practice room is one thing and it's very important, but there's a lot of other skill sets that are really important to develop. And so thank you both for sharing this foundational definition of what we're going to be getting further into. So could we get to a more practical conversation about what that looks like, equipping a 21st century musician in your respective offices?
Yeah, sure. So my office is called Launchpad, on purpose. It's the career services office inside of Peabody Institute, and it's embedded there to give people a start to their career after they've gone through their 4 years or 2 years, if they're doing 2 years or more, they're doing graduate study or doctoral study at our program, to kind of have their start to their next phase in their career. So we call the office Launchpad, term like rocket ships where they're starting off on their trajectory, right? And so our office, what we've tried to do is not have everything so separate in terms of the education. So inside of that, we still offer the traditional career services offerings, but now we've started to go into the curriculum. We have something called the breakthrough curriculum, which every student at Peabody needs to take to be able to graduate, needs to interface with, where students get to explore their careers, but then we also work with them on branding themselves and knowing what they stand for, doing mission statements, artist mission statements, and putting together projects. And then we have a pitching course where they learn how to grant write, right? So these are their first forays into those with coaching, but we stand it up as a class. So we were able to talk with them through that. And then they're always, our office is always accessible. But the great thing is that our teachers in those courses, everybody that works in the Launchpad office is teaching in those courses. So the students are seeing us all the time in different avenues. And we're able to really coach them through this process of coming out of the classroom and kind of saying, here are some educators that you have that are still practicing musicians that are doing this on a daily basis, right? We are doing all of the things as independent artists, and we're helping you understand what are the next things that you need to get on your way. A lot of what we do is in tandem with what the technical teachers are doing, where they're working on their proficiency. We're getting the time to look at people's resumes and say, okay, here, where are your gaps? Where are you heading? Where are you thinking about going? What conversations are you having with your teachers? Okay, when is your next competition? When is your next festival? These are the types of things that you're aiming for. So in tandem with the professors kind of heading them in that direction, you'll need other supports, right? You'll need financial support to do that. We have grants through our office to help them do those things. So we are really thinking about ways to make sure that the connectivity that they have, it's like a through point. When they come in, once they go out, a couple years after they graduate, kind of thinking about those barriers that they're going to see and try to anticipate and help them figure out ways to deal with that through, connectivity with our office.
Yeah, that's really great. And so great to hear about the similarity between the philosophy of what's happening in Peabody and what we've been doing here in the Jacob School of Music over the last, few years. The Office of Entrepreneurship and Creative Development's been around for about 10 years now. And it was created with this vision that, anything in the arts these days has to be adaptive, has to be responsive, and has to be innovative in some ways. And so we love the idea of this word entrepreneurship sort of in the middle of career preparation, career development. And so over the years, we've developed, similar to Peabody, we've developed courses. We've integrated those courses now. Hopefully going forward, we haven't been able to actually introduce them to the entire curriculum. But going forward, the good news is that the Jacob School of Music, all BM students in the Jacob School of Music are going to be taking the career development course, which is very exciting for us. In addition to that, we have one-on-one career advising. We work very closely with departments as they develop their own solutions for career preparation, career development. And we're working very closely now with more and more departments as they parallel their activities within their own curriculum. The jazz department, for instance, has completely reimagined its curriculum, and we are heavily involved in advising and collaborating with them as they position curriculum for students in ways that they think are appropriate. So in addition to the career development side of things, we have a full suite of activities related to entrepreneurial and innovative action. We are the hub for about 22 student organizations that very often function as sort of mini not-for-profits or chapters of national organizations. There's a lot of activity there, program development, project development, collaborations. We're very excited about a growing set of relationships between the Jacob School of Music and other arts entities on the IU Bloomington campus. So intersectionality and interdisciplinarity has become a big part of what we do, especially when it comes to popular culture or media for music for media and things like that. So we're working very closely with those types of projects. And then we also run what we call our innovation grants. And then we have an innovation competition that is a sort of a focus point at the beginning of February that really give students an opportunity to become more heard, more intentional, and more serious about embracing this idea of creating meaningful work in the world. One of the things that I want to just quickly touch on is I think that in classical music, and I think it's quite different actually to other genres, the world of classical music and the world of the conservatory has been very much about emulating and practicing a set of techniques that are embedded in historical traditions. And it has a lot to do with being an artist through interpretation of other people's work, composers' work, or already existing art that we sort of reframe and remount as our own voice within an already existing work. I think one of the big shifts that is happening right now in terms of 21st century musicianship is creating something new, taking responsibility for maybe mixing things in different ways, producing on your own, learning how to use media to produce new works, creating experiences that are sensory and highly connected to the voices of a community, for instance, that go to creating something new. So I think that musicians today, just like musicians in other genres, frankly, I think that pop musicians have been doing this for a long time, hip hop, you name any number of different genres, and they have actually been creating constantly new music and new musical experiences. I think the big shift in classical music right now is that we're looking towards a set of skills that not only benefit from the past and can embody practices that are deeply woven into technical study, but translating that into something new and something meaningful and voicing a response to the moment in our world that we exist in, rather than simply replicating the past.
I love that you said that. And I agree that that's the shift. Are you seeing some of that being initiated by the students, or is it a mixed bag?
I'll be honest with you, I think it's a mixed bag. And I'll just quickly jump in and say why. I think that some of the students in the Jacob School of Music really get it. And they are incredibly excited and they jump on these opportunities. We have a student organization that formed called Music and Gaming, and they have taken off as a student organization and do absolutely amazing things. There are, however, still a good proportion of students in the Jacob School of Music who think it's their job to interpret and to emulate perfection, this whole idea of excellence, without taking the next step, which is that ownership of the music and the creation of something new. And I think that we are still midway in that transition. At the same time, I think that there are a lot of new faculty in the Jacobs School of Music who are very excited about creating new work in a way that reimagines what we are as classical artists. And it's in that space, I think, that a lot of really creative work is being done. So it's a mixed bag.
I would agree with that and add to that I think both of our schools are embedded in larger institutions, right? So we are always thinking about the intersection of the students, the community that they're in, Peabody being in Baltimore and using the surrounding areas to kind of inform what their learning opportunities are. I happen to be the manager of community partnerships, so we're always thinking a lot about partnerships outside that will give them a kind of balanced experience of all of those things. So there are places that you are going to see tradition upheld, but Baltimore is a very arts-rich community, so you will see that intersection of creating new things and collaborating across departments. Peabody itself is a conservatory. Even though we're talking about music, we have dance now, we have music for new media. So the composers and conductors and everyone is kind of in the same space and redesigning whatever they want their next project to be. So it could be an interdisciplinary project, and they're closer together so that they're really having these discussions as individuals about what they want to see coming forward from them in the future by taking the analysis of what it is that they're learning, or guest artists coming in and taking all of these techniques and what can they bring forward. I think one of the big things, as you all just talked about, is the shift in who is hired to teach, and the mindset of the people that are the faculty members. And those people come in with their own networks and their own backgrounds. And just to be frank, like, I'm the generation of people that were taught before that. So we had a certain experience of school, and we have been watching the entire shift of the entire landscape, and then enter COVID, putting everything on pause. And so there's a lot of different things that we want to make sure that students are prepared for, because we're experiencing it in real time. And so this generation of students, they are asking the questions. We all are like simultaneously working through the answer across industry, higher education, and everything. And I would want to say a little bit more transparent about how this process is taking shape, and really, talking with them about them being the next leaders of the next chamber ensembles or the next things that are coming out. And those of us who have the opportunity to present them or put them in touch with people that are arts presenters, arts presenters are really focused on tapping into the community and hearing what the community wants to say. So this nuance of, like, the kids know what's up, like, they know what's going on in the community right now, what's being talked about, even though we're training them with skills to be excellent at whatever they do. They actually know what the ethos and what's happening in the community. So to be able to make that connection more fluid, we're building all of these opportunities, like, through our career development offices, to make sure they have those networks and be able to build or be able to explore through community-based learning, experiential learning opportunities, and start to really get mentored in that way, so that when they go off on their own or they decide to join these companies or anything else, that they're prepared to continue to do that work and really push it in the direction that they want to see.
Yeah, I love that. And, a lot of the focus of conversations that we've been having at Equity Arc, a lot of it falls into that orchestral space, which of course is that more traditional. But what do you say to students who are seeking that orchestral career, of the benefits of having this entrepreneurial mindset and other tools in the toolbox?
I happen to have the benefit of coming from the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra's Orchids program. And so in working inside of the orchestra model, we often have this conversation with the students that are in my classes about the fact that the orchestras might ask of you to go into the community. How are you going to show up? And that's really the challenge. That's really the challenge I kind of give them. Like, knowing what your strengths are is important. And that's why we take the time in that course to kind of really discuss what's really going on. Do you think you have the propensity to teach K through 12 students? Do you want to work more with adults? And all of that is okay, just so that you know you are able to explore that and explain that to your future employers, so that you're put in the best position to represent the company in the way they want to be represented out in the world. They don't send everybody, but you may be asked at any point in time to do that. So those are some of the, and it depends on what orchestra that you go into, but I'd rather you be prepared that that's something you have to do. So like the Baltimore Symphony had midweek concerts where we brought a lot of students from Baltimore City schools in to see these concerts, right? And they also have the opportunity for students to come in and get one-on-one kind of, aside from the BSYO who has side-by-side concerts, they can come in and ask the orchestra questions at any time. So being able to have conversations with students about, and that seems like simple skills, but people don't know how to relate or how that will impact the next generation that's coming to see them be interested in the art form that we have. So there are some times where we really have a conversation and the students are, oh, but why do I need to know to go into the community center or different things? It's like they may very well send a subset of you to a community center prior to their concert, right? And so that's why the speaking skills, that's why the writing skills, that's why all those things come into play, and giving you a chance to practice that now, so that you're not surprised by it when you go into that, is kind of the conversation that I have with my students, at least.
That's so great. I'll just quickly jump in and take it in a slightly different direction. I love that. And I totally agree with you that that's so much of what students need to prepare for, because you never know what comes down the pike in terms of community opportunities and the need to communicate about yourself as well. But, I'm thinking more in terms of like innovation thinking within the world of music. And I think that there's a through line into performance practice. I think that for decades, conservatories taught one style of performance, even within the world of classical music. And you've seen over the last 30, 40 years, a massive shift into interpretation of music in different ways, whether it be historical performance or jazz or other styles of music, French music versus Italian. You've got this need now to be really flexible and adaptive with how you perform. And those are the performers that major symphony orchestras, and ensembles around the country are looking for. They're looking for musicians who are highly skilled and very aware of what it means to play music in different styles for different purposes and different reasons. So I think that innovation thinking can go deeply into performance practice. I don't think that there's any separation between the two, frankly. I think that there's a complete through line into performance. The other thing is that as a performer in a symphony orchestra, or an opera house or what have you, if you have a major social media presence, if you have a fan base, if you have your own projects that you're developing that people are attracted to, you become more attractive to the ensemble that wants to hire you. As a soloist, you can go to a symphony orchestra and say, and this is an actual example I got from, Noah Bendix-Bagley, who's with the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra. He said, if you have a fan base, you can go to an orchestra and bring an audience to that event in ways that somebody who is not savvy and 21st century musician cannot do. And so I don't really buy into this thought that somehow there's a tension or a difference between being highly flexible and adaptive as a community-facing musician and voicing different types of music, and somebody who's deeply wedded to a more traditional career path. I think that there's a through line, and I think everybody can benefit from thinking about creating meaningful art, learning how to be savvy, learning how to communicate about yourself well, and learning how to articulate your values in the middle of what you do in your musicianship. And I think that if you do that, you're much better suited and much more ready to take advantage of opportunities that come toward you in the 21st century.
I mean, that makes perfect sense. Like the creativity never stops. It goes back to that keyword of being holistic when it comes to this approach. I would love to start talking about the alumni. We've been hinting at it a little bit, but Let's get into it. So I know that both of your organizations participated in the Strategic National Arts Alumni Project, which of course surveyed a whole bunch of different arts alumni across a bunch of different institutions. And so I'm curious if there's any pieces of data that came from that project or any other data you collect when it comes to your alumni that either surprised you or confirmed anything that you've been kind of thinking when it comes to the state of the industry.
I would say that Snap is a very wide reaching because it's trying to capture all arts. I would just frame that first for the conversation. So they're asking questions that are more about, do you feel prepared to be, in the career that you're in? Did you feel prepared by your school to take on or whatever the skills that your school provided you with? Have they helped you in what you're doing? A lot of our students, the performance-based students that are still engaged in performance, they feel prepared in terms of the technical skill, right? The thing that didn't surprise me is that a lot of folks that may have had the question about why they were learning these kind of business tools or these other skills so early, they start to see that when they get out in the field that they needed it and they go, aha. And so the response to that question was like, did you feel like you got the professional development tools? Of course, we got the yeses because it was provided, or the people that took advantage of all the things that were there for them. They were like, yeah, by taking these courses or writing for these grants or, delving into these career development things, I'm really, really happy that Peabody had that for me as I went on to the career. Oftentimes, obviously at the different levels, undergraduate students might not understand the need for it first, but as a graduate student, when you're coming in, or DMA student, right, thinking about going into teaching in higher education or high schools or different things, they know that they need some of these skills. And so they're grateful when they get here or they transition schools. So they might come from Jacobs to Peabody or vice versa. They're grateful to have these through points in their schools that are providing them with all of these services and getting them ready for those things. The opposite thing is being prepared to take on the role yourself to stand up projects, as we've all been talking about, right? So one of the iterations is that if you're not placed in a large ensemble, orchestra, etc., you're going to have to work in chamber groups, and being able to start one and run one and know what that business model is like and be able to do those things, them having touch points and connectivity to us afterwards, or still being able to access the resources outside of our school in terms of like help for career advice or looking over how to write grants or different things like that, becomes really, really crucial for them as they are having this kind of portfolio type of career, right? And doing both what they want to do as performers, but also having to take on other avenues such as teaching, other avenues to sustain their lifestyle. So those are some of the things that have been coming back from, our first destination surveys at Peabody or the SNAP reports, kind of like telling the whole picture and the whole story of what the students had experienced while they were here. And then a couple years after they leave, what they're experiencing in the field, and being able to do that work of like thinking about their trajectory very carefully with an advisor, a mentor, a coach, and plugging in those holes to be able to say, yes, I did this internship, which landed me this kind of opportunity, or I started this project, which helped me develop my idea, and then later on be able to place them in a different type of position than an entry pathway position at another institution.
Yeah, that's really great. It's interesting to hear you talk about that at Peabody, because there's some very strong parallels with what we saw coming out of the SNAP study for the Jacobs School of Music. The SNAP study has this very interesting graph that they provide, or a comparison. They like, what did you get from the institution versus what do you use in your professional life, and how do those two match up? And there are, I think, 15 different data points associated with that. And the ones that struck out for me, that struck me in terms of being probably provided by the Jacobs School of Music, and I would imagine most conservatories around the country, are artistic technique broad knowledge and education and some leadership skills, but not necessarily completely there. But then when you switch, and so the in other words, the what they got from the Jacob School of Music, what they need in their professional lives was very well taken care of. However, when you move into, as Kendaya said, when you move into the other areas that are so significant and so critical to a successful career, entrepreneurial skills, financial business management skills, networking, relationships, and relationship building, there was a massive contrast between what they felt they got from the institution and what they really need in their professional lives. And so we've spent the last 10 years trying to sort of really fill that gap. I want to mention too that one of the nice things that came out of the SNAP study was the confirmation that most of our alumni actually lived very successful, very happy, and very fulfilling lives, both in the world of music, but then in adjacent fields or in other fields. And very few of them felt that their music education was a waste of time, that they didn't feel that they were getting a substantial grounding in whatever it would be that they need to do to become a successful professional. And we've spoken a lot, there's been a lot of research done about this, the transferable skills. What is it that you get out of a high-end arts performance or research degree program that can be then used in other areas? And I want to quickly just mention that I once had a conversation with the head of HR at Oracle, who I was just happened to be on an airplane, sitting next to the guy, and he said to me, "So where do you come from?" I said, "Jacobs." So he said, "Oh, I know Jacobs because he's up in Indianapolis." He said, "By the way, we did a study recently of the profile of our best employees." And he said, "Guess what came out of it?" I said, "Well, obviously you're telling a musician, so I'm going to assume it's a musician." He said, "Yeah, there were two. The one was an Olympic athlete, and the other was a highly trained musician." And so it's nice to know that even if it's not directly applicable to your life, a study in music to a very high degree can be converted into a very successful career in other places.
That's amazing. That's great to hear, and definitely confirms a lot of what we've been saying. It's always great to have the research and data back a lot of that up. So when we're talking about music performance, what have you observed what their career outcomes look like and where they're landing? I'm sure it's a mixture of different outcomes, but if you could shed some light when it comes to that.
There's a range. You get the lucky ones who immediately find a position in a symphony orchestra and feel that they're established as a professional in the field. But generally speaking, we feel that it takes 3 to 5 years for our graduates to find their footing and to establish where they think they will be going for an extended period of time. Now, obviously that shifts. We all live careers that move in many different directions, but it takes a while, I think, in the world of the arts for the formation of a career to take place. It's not like you go to the business school and you're automatically picked up by a corporation and you have a job and you're in the system. You have to make it. You have to make it happen. And so there's obviously a variety. I don't want to be too general about this, but in principle, I think it takes a few years for the value of your education and experiences to coalesce around a career path that seems sustainable.
That 3 to 5 year gap is exactly what the target of the breakthrough curriculum was designed to kind of think about, preparing students to navigate whilst they are waiting for that positioning, right? So we know that across all of the institutions, we know that that's the case. And so providing them, and I think all of the career services departments will say this, providing them the options to be able to sustain and continue to practice and perform at a high level whilst they are taking on auditions for more long-term stabilized different things is kind of what we're hoping to achieve with all of the coachings that we're talking about. So we're talking about things like, obviously, if you go into detail, some people can be contractors, some people can go into sub work for orchestras, some people are joining fellowships, some people are doing chamber ensembles. Has turned up to be one of the things that is the most interesting I find at Peabody. The people that start to develop their chamber groups at school continue them whilst their other members are also looking at other engagement things, and those then sometimes turn into their own special opportunities, right? Now you start to get presented, or you start to, going back to this thought about once you develop your profile on social media and different things, and you start to get energy around yourself, then other people start looking at you. So in the meantime, thinking about how to continuously project and portray that art in smaller focus groups and iterations, because there are some people that are interested in having the art with them, but they can't contract a whole orchestra to come to them, but they can do a chamber ensemble. And so you can still have these iterations of things while you're looking at large, medium, or small orchestra placements, and have your solo careers and different things kind of impact and inform what you're doing. And so I think what we're experiencing in our career services departments, and like once we're taking a feedback from the students and kind of looking at all the data, is thinking about ways to demystify this idea of the portfolio career, right? Because there are a lot of, I jokingly tell my students, there's a lot of orchestral musicians that are teaching you right now at Peabody. Why, I want you to stop seeing that as separate things, because that is a fulfillment of their, as you said, value of your service, right? I am now giving my service of how I got to this orchestra and all of my knowledge and my background back to a student to train them to be able to do the same things. And so being able to take all the non-musical things and put it inside of our career development offices, let's say, so we can have those conversations about, okay, in the 3 to 5 year gap, here are some of the things that you can employ. And if you have a new project or new art, there are people, there are consortiums that want to have your music played and different things like that, if you're a composer or different things. So those are kind of some of the elements that we're kind of piecing together for them.
That's great. And I want to just quickly mention too that sometimes we think of the music training world as a sort of a uniform space. It's actually made up of lots of different types of art. And in a place like the Jacob School of Music, for instance, we have ballet, and the placement rate of the ballet students is very, very high. We have audio engineering, which is 100%. The music education department is a completely different world in which individual students are placed in full-time jobs as they come out of the institution, and our placement is very, very, very high. So I think that the idea that somehow all musicians are somehow lost in the wilderness until they finally find themselves mysteriously, a few years later, is a misrepresentation of what's actually going on. There are some, even within the performance space, very, very successful placements of students, and in some areas, almost 100%. And so I think that the idea that every single musician has to work at Starbucks is a complete misrepresentation of the professional field.
To that point, I know you mentioned that 3 to 5 year gap. You try to adjust that while they're currently within the program, which makes sense. And I'm curious if you could both talk about, what does it look like to engage alumni outside of the program? Like, are they able to come back for any support, and what does that look like?
Yep. So our office is actually open to alumni. Our office is kind of hybrid, working with the alumni services office and taking in this information to figure out what tools the alumni need. So up through 2 years out from Peabody, they can still apply for career development grants. We have grants available to students both in and alumni. Afterwards, if they want to pursue projects and different things like that, we are open to coachings. They can come and schedule meetings with us at any time. So we still have that touch point available to them. A great thing that's also what we've started to do with Peabody and Johns Hopkins in general is use our learning innovation services, which have started up some open educational resources. So we published our first open educational resource around the path to funding, and that's accessible to anybody, everybody, all other institutions, everybody. We're putting it everywhere, right? So finding ways to use these tools and open resource kind of placements from our office to be able to still send out information, still transfer information to our alumni as well. And we have obviously built up other things and tools and resources such as like newsletters, where we're still having opportunities and things that we send to them once they signed up. And we oftentimes, if they're in the loop or want to know different things in the area, we would often have, like, we have a performer referral service where folks are looking for Peabody related folks to perform on different types of opportunities, gigs, different things. We often send our alumni different information there. And so thinking about all where they are, where they end up, especially in this DMV corridor, DC, Maryland, Virginia corridor, we just opened the new 555 building where a lot of people will have opportunities to perform there. Just thinking about the types of things that they need. The one unique thing I'll say, our office is fully staffed. The first 3 people that ran our office are all Peabody alumni. So they still have the perspective of what a Peabody student is needing. And our director is the chair of the professional studies department. So we're, as you were talking about, working with all of the other departments to make sure that the students are having access even beyond their graduation point with us, to be able to help them through different things that they want to do.
Wow, that's fantastic. I'm so happy to hear that the programs are so sort of designed and geared towards a continued relationship with Peabody beyond the years that they study there. That's really fantastic. The Jacob School of Music, we have a lot of alumni who reconnect with us, who actually, since this office has been around for 10 years now, we have some very deep relationships with many, many, many students who go off, and we continue to serve their needs in an ad hoc way. It's not programmatically designed in the ways that it is at Peabody, but it's pretty robust because of how many of them maintain contact with us. I should mention that, we have a very large alumni population, about 16,000 across the country. And I have noticed that there is a huge connection through the individual departments and through the individual studios that the alumni continue to have. And many of our guests, many of the connections that we have to the professional world, many of the feedback loops that we have now for alumni who give back to students and mentor them are organically embedded in the school, just by sheer circumstance of the fact that we have such a large alumni population, many of whom want to give back. And so it seems to drive itself very organically. But that said, I love the idea of structuring it more and more so that students really can benefit from the programs that exist in the Jacob School of Music.
I would add to what you're saying about, so thinking about that connectivity backwards in that loop backwards in, right? So now we have a course called Exploring Arts Careers, which is the first course. It's going to be offered to our sophomores in the upcoming year, which is the entry pathway to knowing what are all the different avenues that they can explore from the standpoint of Peabody graduates mostly, and other people that are in the industry. And so we have the opportunity for people to come in and talk to them about their trajectory and pathway, the things that they did while they were in school, to explore and build those skills. So they're not only hearing it from their teachers, they're hearing it from active participants, active Peabody graduates. Afterwards, we also tap into this idea of Johns Hopkins overall has a one-hop mentorship program. So we think about how we can use those opportunities, and Hopkins Hire, and we've just launched our Peabody Pathways internship program, right? So how can we connect all of those dots together so that students are really getting that exposure with people who have walked their walk and came out of the school the same way? As we said, we're serving, both of us, we're serving different types of students now, the dance students, the music for new media. So as these emerging art forms are coming up, it's really crucial for us to have those connectivity points to people who are now pushing those things into the forefront, and having the opportunity to collaborate with more traditional, the conductors, the composers, right? Showing them what that is on the outside, but mentoring them on the inside so that they can do interdisciplinary projects and know what that feels like, and then have something of their own to showcase when they come out with a project, or, tools and data to show people like, hey, I've been doing this at Peabody and this is why I'm useful for your organization, etc. So I think that's starting to shift. I think across all the schools, from all of the conferences that I'm hearing, a lot of us are really tapping into our alumni to be able to really speak to our students about what those next steps are as well.
That's so important and so helpful. I mean, you have just a broad range of expertise, like right at the fingertips. So it makes sense definitely to re-engage for sure. We're reaching the end of our time together. And so I just want to pose this last question to you both. I ask this in every interview, but I'm wondering, what is your vision for the future of classical music?
I love that question. I think it's going to move from a unified set of practices to a diverse set of practices. In that, when I first studied, eons ago, it was like there was only one way of playing anything. And you somehow learned the sort of mid-19th century performance practice and you applied it to just about everything, including jazz. It was like weird, And over time, there's been a much more deeper understanding of styles, voices, who's represented, how they're being, all the things that we've been speaking about over the last 45 minutes. And I think that classical music is going to move more into a sort of a diverse set of representations, whether it's small ensemble, large ensembles, community embedded, major symphony orchestras, and like the major metropolitan. I think that there's just going to be a lot more diversity about what it means to be an art musician. I want to speak about one more thing related to classical music, and it would take some time to explain this, but I just want to quickly throw it out there. I think that, and I want to just be careful not to be too general about this, but I think that over the last 100 years, one of the biggest problems with that uniformity of action was this idea of purity in classical music, this idea that somehow to be a classical musician, you had to be trained in a particular way, and you had to subscribe to certain cultural values, and you had to play and behave in a certain way. There is a diaspora of classical music that already exists, that exists in many, many, many different places, including gaming, film music. There's also critic musics that are deeply woven into the classical music aesthetic. And I think that one of the things that's going to happen as we move forward now in the world of classical music is to drop this notion of a purified space in which classical music is performed as the only arena in which we can be creative. And we will realize that as artists, we can inhabit different spaces in different ways and open up a lot more diversity than has existed over the last 100 years.
I really love what you're saying there. As somebody that comes from an kind of really intersectional background, I'm an immigrant, I'm a African American, Black, we would say Black person, because I'm from the Caribbean. I think challenging the notion of classical is embedded in a lot of what the conversations are happening right now. Thinking about 21st century musicianship, thinking about all those things. What does it actually mean to play? What is classical music? What does that mean to play classical music? Is it a subset of music? Is it just a genre? I think the conversation we've been having today is gearing us towards preparing orchestral musicians and preparing musicians that can perform, as you said earlier, any type of music, right? And it will be orchestrated and it will be performed by you at the highest technical level. And classical music, in the way that we study, in the era that we study, is a subset of all the things that I'm prepared to be able to offer. And I think that leaves room for that innovation that you all are talking about, right? So what does it mean to make music about the issues that are happening right now? If I'm coming up as a composer right now, watching what's going on in the world, what does that mean? And how can I get my colleagues to emote that, right? By using the skills we studied from centuries and centuries ago. That's what we're trained for. But now how do we, the word that people use is zeitgeist, right? So how do we really carry on and be the musicians of the people, which is what the music was intended to do anyway. We're giving a service back to the world. So I think my future of classical music is really making sure, and we have a whole department that's about to start up, which is performing arts and health. And that's thinking about how our music affects other people, whether it be their mental health and well-being, or literally in the hospital, their physical health and well-being, what's happening. And out in the world, how is your music of service to what's going on in the world? I think we're going to start to see a lot more students and professors having dialogue about this. And as you come through, I think the pathway is going to move backwards. The conversation is going to go backwards and go back into the elementary school system, right? So all of these, we're talking from the higher education standpoint. And I think the same conversation is happening with instrumental teachers all across the country and the world about how K through 12 information is delivered. And now we're coming to a crux where we're going to hit a meeting place where we're all going to have to be on the same kind of in the same trajectory for these students. We're going to have teachers that meet them at the higher education level to be able to carry on these conversations or these things that they're experiencing from early on in their life, so that they can all feel a part of the music that they're making and giving back and giving of service. And then they can become the leaders that kind of lead all these institutions in that, to continue pushing that conversation forward. So I think that's kind of the future, my personal future for what's going on with our students here.
That's such a great way to wrap it up, because it's so important to think about each stage of musical development from the very beginning, the entry and early, all the way to professional, and college is square in the middle of that process. And so the partnership on both sides of those stages are so important. And so I'm glad that we were able to have this conversation. I feel like we probably needed like 30 more minutes to talk about the other half of what happens before they enter, but that's to be continued. So thank you both for being here today and having this conversation. I learned a lot, and I think our listeners will as well.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
That concludes our spotlight on how the Jacobs School of Music and the Peabody Institute are preparing their students for 21st century careers. You can learn about all our members at equityarc.org. Until next time, let's continue to make progress towards racial equity across the ARC.